All right, it's Wednesday. It's an early BRAP. Look, BRAP wants to play some video games later tonight and not stay up past 11 o'clock. So I figured, you know what? Let me do a quick early BRAP. Maybe some of the other BRAP panel members will be coming in at some point later. Maybe not. I think Slow-Mo said he's going to try to come in. Did not hear from my man, B-Money or Gaming Forte. Hopefully those two gentlemen can join us. If not, big shout out to those two individuals and Slow-Mo backslap as well. And Slow-Mo just got a 3080 Ti. Yay, Slow-Mo. Thanks for making me feel a little bit of FOMO. Which actually, that's, well, I don't know, anyhow. And those 4090 benchmarks, I got to say, look pretty impressive. But anyhow, I do have with me the great Lee Hampton, or Hamp, as we refer to as he goes by here on BRAP. But what's up, Hamp?
Nothing much, man. I'll try and channel everyone else who couldn't make it tonight.
No doubt, man. Hey, did you see the benchmarks for the 4090?
I did not. No, so I've been in the office today, so I haven't had a chance to catch up with any of that.
Yes. Cyberpunk 2077, ultra settings, no DLSS, 4K 120. Boom.
Nice.
Yeah, right? I'm not spending $1,700 on a card, though. But I'm not going to lie. Hamp. My bonus kick is kicking in this weekend. Sometimes it's nice to reward yourself for a little hard work. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You saw I sent you the links for the 3080 Ti, right?
I did. And Slow-Mo just got a Founders Edition today through Best Buy. I don't know how much he paid for that, but I'm not going to lie, man. Like, for me, I think the 3080 is tempting to me. It's not $1,700. I have some money to burn. So yeah, I don't know, man.
Now, of course, this is not my recommendation for
I
you
understand.
or for Slow-Mo, but because you guys keep insisting that you're going to do it anyway, I'll help out when I come across a clue.
Yeah, it's just like I said, I have money to burn, and it's it's like I said, I'm rationalizing. It's like, hey, I've worked my butt off and I got a bonus, and sometimes it's nice to pat yourself on the back for some hard work, right? And reward yourself. I don't know.
To be quite honest, if you're going down that path, I mean, what I've always said is I've never seen the point in you upgrading your card, but I have seen the point now that you're starting to live stream a little more. I said I've always seen the point in you going to streaming with two PCs and building a second box on a 3080 Ti and using your 3070 Ti for your streaming PC would make sense, and or a backup gaming PC. So, if you're gonna put out the Quan for a 3080 Ti, you may want to just see how much it costs you to get another box. Seeing as how they're so ridiculously cheap right now.
The problem is I don't have room to put a second box. I'd have to put it like on the other side of my couch on the floor.
Yeah, I see.
I mean, I could do it. I just don't have the room to put it under my desk. I have a very small space here. I mean, I suppose if I could, I got to figure out how to get a desk in here, like a larger desk. I've been trying to figure that out. I just don't know how to make it work. The thing that messes me up is that I have this storage door that's under a set of stairs in the gaming room. And if I didn't have that, I'd have more wall space, more real estate. I could slide over a table there. I just can't do it between the door to get in the room and then the door that takes you to the storage space under the stairs. That's my problem.
Wait, I hope you're not saying that the missus has you in the little Harry Potter closet for your gaming room.
No, she does not know. This is actually a fairly large room, but the problem is I just don't have, I mean, I could technically move my TV to the area where my gaming, where my, what's it called is, my, where my PC is, and mount it on the wall that way. But
that's just geometry, man. I'm sure we can figure that math out.
I just need to. I got to take a picture of my room and maybe have you take a look at it.
Yeah, no. We could definitely do geometry. That's just math. However, the gaming community at large on Twitter seems to not be able to do mathematics. It appears.
No. Yes, this is true. As we found out this week that some people equate revenue to profitability. Yeah. Well, we understand revenue can lead to profitability, but to say that they're the same is not true. And anyhow, first of all, big shout out to everyone in the live chat. Thanks for joining us early here on BRAP. We usually don't go live at 6:15 p.m. So this is an early show for us. And, we, like I said, BRAP wants to get some gaming in tonight, not stay up past 11 o'clock. So it's like, I am going to, I was like, you know what, let's do an early live stream. And there's definitely a lot to talk about. What's up, Ghost in the Garage Gaming. Big shout out again to everyone in the live chat. Please do me a favor, retweet the link here in the live chat to you on Twitter or whatever your favorite social media platform is. Let everyone know that we're live. I'm going to do the same here. Hold on a sec here. I got to retweet this. Hold on a sec here. Calling out the bias of the CMA. We're going to talk about that, by the way. Microsoft is accusing a regulatory body of favoritism. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Sorry, Hamp. I'm just closing some windows. Yeah, I don't know, man. I got to figure this room thing out, man. And then I have a refrigerator down here too. That's the other thing. I have a mini fridge. I don't know, Hamp. I got to take a picture of my room, send it to you, see what you think, man. What I can move around here. Maybe that's a good starting point.
Yeah, it's a real problem. When I moved into this house, I had everything around the walls of the room, so that the middle of the floor was open, but I couldn't get as much in here, and I just sat down with my iPad and used some apps and kind of scripted and drew things out, kind of planning before I went to cut wood, so to speak. And then I was able to configure the room to get 7 workstations in here, so it can be done.
Yeah, I just need to figure out how to get a larger desk. I mean, there's an area where I could put the desk, but my wife's like, well, it's kind of a high traffic area. Then somebody's gonna have to walk around. You know what? If I could move the refrigerator, that actually would be. Actually, you know what? No, the problem is I don't have an outlet where I don't have an outlet close to the refrigerator. Oh man. I don't know, Hamp. I got to figure this out, man. It's that damn door. That damn Hobbit door is the problem. Anyhow, enough of my gaming room situation. But, so some of the benchmarks came out for the 4090 Hamp. Looks impressive, but I don't think I'm going to splurge. I think, if you're, I kind of agree with you. Like, if I'm going to do something like that, it's probably better to get like another PC to do streaming. I think that probably makes more sense as a content creator.
Yeah. Yep.
Which means I could have bought that PC that Forte was selling, which I did not do.
Yeah. Did that have a 3080 Ti in it?
Yeah, a 3080. Remember? I think he sold it for $1,100.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now
I'm sure GameStop will have deals like that around the country.
Yeah, I gotta look. I gotta take a look at their website and see what they have. Because I could put it, like, for the time being, I could put it like in front of, like, leaning up against the wall, kind of in front of the couch, the couch no one sits on or by, and then just do it like that, connect it that way. Anyhow, yeah, we'll see. But yeah, Hamp, you bring up an interesting question because, or you brought up something interesting about mathematics. We saw a little bit of that this week. This has been an interesting week, by the way, where Microsoft was reporting. There was a report of Microsoft generating some revenue from Game Pass, which was, oh shoot, hold on, I need to find it now. I closed that window out by accident. Let's see here. I think it was 2.9 billion.
Yeah. Yes, that was the slide supposedly unearthed by TweetTown, which has not been corroborated by any official channels, as far as I know.
No, it has not. But TweetTown picked this up, and it's other news sources have ran with this. So, for those who don't know, that there was a slide that, and actually this is in a document to the Brazilian regulatory agency that indicates Xbox Game Pass saw $2.9 billion in revenue in 2021. So, people whipped out the jump to conclusions, Matt, and the rest is history, as they say, Hamp, where people say, oh, it's profitable, or they're breaking even, or one person who I don't understand how people go to this individual for news or any kind of anyhow. This individual said, well, they're not spending $2.9 billion in third-party licensing. They're profitable. And it became a discussion around the difference between revenue and what's up, Punk Kiddish? DMV Gaming. The conversation it became this, is it profitable? Is it sustainable? Is it this? Is it that? And I was, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that a lot of people were kind of were jumping to conclusions as it relates to profitability, and then also people saying that it's a failure, it's not sustainable, it's not. I always say that argument. There's two sides of the same coin of this argument. Like people that proclaim that Game Pass is a financial failure and a mess, and those that are saying that it's profitable. When in reality, all we know is that it's just sustainable, and that is per Microsoft. Also, people trying to. I had two individuals debating me on Twitter, saying that Phil Spencer and Aaron Greenberg did say Game Pass was not profitable. That was not true. And actually, one individual provided an article with the same article didn't actually cite the original article they were discussing, and that individual missed the fact that the author of that article he was citing did not put in quotations that Phil Spencer said it was profitable, which means that is the author's interpretation of what Phil Spencer said. So that's where we were with that, Hamp. Now, I think you kind of did some math on this. I don't know if that's something you want to share, Hamp, with the folks listening. But what was the math that you? So what was the? So what are your thoughts on this, man? Like the whole sustainability, profitability argument, stuff like that.
So in terms of the quote, before I ever read anybody's comments about it, when I saw Spencer's comments where he specifically said it was sustainable, I said, yeah, that's the verbiage that a C-level officer uses when they can't say that it's profitable. That seems to me, I won't necessarily say it's fairly obvious. I'll just say that's the perspective in the lens that I looked at it through. I don't think that there was anything like, pithy or like
hey, Ham,
super.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah.
Oh man, Sam Walton just said he picked up a 3090 on Amazon for $869. Oh man!
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, Sam, DM me on Twitter, please. Let me know what cards you got because that's that. Yeah. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ham.
Yeah, and then let's check your power supply and check what you have for connectors and make sure that you can run it safely. So the quote, I didn't think that there was anything in there where like Spencer was trying to be like, smarter than everyone or try and bury some secret success like in some cryptic message. It's pretty much the standard rules for behavior for C-level officers when doing interviews and things like that, is that they can't say anything in the interview that cross-cuts with their responsibilities as an officer under SEC compliance. And so he can't say that it's profitable if it's not actually profitable. He can't say that it's profitable and then have something show up on a balance sheet that conflicts with that. And my feeling is that's why he used the term sustainable. And just like I think I saw Sam say in the chat, right, sustainable means when a corporation puts a deal together that you can afford to burn cash, right, if an overall business venture is profitable or if you're bearing those costs somewhere, right? And so as a great, for instance, right, for many years, right, Microsoft has not revealed what the actual costs or profitability is of Azure itself. Azure right now is buried in I think it's the servers and tools operating segment, which includes things such as Microsoft Office 365, Microsoft Teams, other things that are huge, big earners for them that everyone buys, right? So almost you could say, almost without too much variance, right, that over 90% of the enterprise market probably buys Microsoft Office. There are some outfits that insist on running on Google Docs, but by and large, once you get up to large enterprise scale, you're going to be running Microsoft Office. And then a lot of those also run Microsoft Teams, because once you're wrapped up in Microsoft Office, and then you're also probably buying the server edition of SQL, and you're also probably buying a lot of other Microsoft products in the enterprise because you get discounts on them the more you bundle those things. It doesn't make as much sense, except for some organizations. Some organizations will go outside the fabric and will go, get a license for Slack or get a license for something else. But by and large, right, these things wind up being packaged. So putting Azure in an operating segment that has a reportable balance sheet right under SEC rules makes sense if you're not trying to reveal whether or not there are potentially losses, or you're using a loss leader strategy, or if it's just not hugely profitable, or just not particularly attractive for investors. And I've long speculated that that's what's been done with Game Pass, which again is fine. What I've always drawn the corollary to is Amazon Prime. Like, I don't know that Amazon Prime is profitable. Amazon Prime, right? The subscription service that you pay, whatever it is now, $130, $150 or whatever a year to get like 2-day shipping, and all of the other things that they have bolted onto to that service. Amazon Music, Amazon Prime Video, yada, 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 yada. I don't know if you aggregate all those costs under total cost accounting, and we'll talk about total cost accounting here when I start talking about the numbers. I don't know that for every individual that you're making money. But the point of that is it gets people in your store, right? And then they spend money, and then you can make money on that. So when you talk about the numbers, as everybody was arguing over this and fighting over this, one of the things that always frustrates me is nobody does any math, right? So everybody talks about makes subjective calls, anecdotal, a lot of them made with no real frame of reference. And so just like I built a model around estimating what the production cost was to make a video game, I then went and constructed a model for estimating the cost of how much it costs Microsoft to run Game Pass. Now, the purpose of these models, the two now that I built, I haven't put the second one on Twitter, is not to say that this is the answer, or to say that unquestionably, right, without doubt, this is proof, right, of how much it costs to make a video game, or how much has to be sold to make a video game, or that video games have to be sold for $70. You can take the model and you can take the variables and you can plug in whatever number you want. I don't really care, right? But the point of it is where this model is concerned, a lot of people keep going, well, the only cost for Game Pass is third-party licensing. And I'm like, no, it's not. And so let's talk a little bit about total cost accounting. So the way numbers are presented to investors within a certain set of rules within the SEC, but those rules are fairly wide and have a lot of latitude. And I can report on my financial metrics almost, I don't want to use the term almost, however I want to, but as long as it makes sense, right, and however I tell the SEC, I'm going to report those numbers, right? And so that means if I'm going to host Game Pass on Azure, it's fine for me to reflect that cost of Azure over in the server and tools operating segment and not reflect it in the EDD operating segment, the entertainment, can't remember what it is now, entertainment devices and something or other division. So that is a way that that corporations use to spin how something looks for investors, right, to derive whatever type of influence they want. All companies do it, not just Microsoft. Google doesn't reflect its numbers for devices. Apple doesn't reflect its numbers for iPhones, but those numbers are rolled up, right, and available in some type of aggregate, right? And it's typically a thing you do for, say, a new business venture or new segment that you're getting into. You don't necessarily want to reveal to everyone how much you're having to invest, right, to make that thing go. However, and this is an argument that I've had very vigorously and very frequently, that is what you do to report company earnings. to do total cost accounting, if your corporation is investing in getting in a business, then I can assure you that within that organization, there are people who are hyper concerned and hyper focused and have a responsibility for reflecting the actual cost to the business of that investment so that you can accurately measure the return on investment, right? Whether or not that penny actually starts turning into a nickel. And so in recent years, I've been directly engaged in this conversation, just to kind of highlight it as an example, right? Where we were pursuing we were involved in a deal with one of the top 3 cloud service providers in an exclusive partnership. And as the director for cloud engineering for the reportable revenue operating segment that it was in, right, there were all these talks with marketing reps and sales reps who were all like, we're going to make you look so good. We're going to make sure that your profit looks high. We're going to make sure that your cost and blah, 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 blah. And I said, okay, please understand you guys aren't doing me any favors. So don't say that as if you're expecting me to say thanks. My responsibility as an officer of the company is that I have to tell the CEO and the CFO who I've had this conversation with, I have to tell them what the return on investment is for the investment that they're making. And that means if this exclusive deal with a cloud service provider only pays 50% of my salary, then the other 50% of my salary is being paid by the corporation. And that is a cost that needs to be reflected. That's not just an, oh, by the way, that's not just an, oh, well, you would have been employed anyway. No, if I'm billing my time to this venture, then my time gets paid for by that. But if it only covers 50%, right, of me, now extrapolate that onto all of my staff, right? Then if I'm borrowing staffing, if I'm borrowing manpower from other P&L centers, right, their time has to be covered, and that's cost, right? If I'm building a lab and putting machine learning AI in it, right, that's not just an, oh, by the way, that cost has to be tracked, and it has to be depreciated, right? And if we're not going to take that hit in costs up front in 1 year, we have to amortize that cost over several years. And the choice on how many years, right, is a choice that the finance types get to weigh into. I don't get to say, the marketing and sales guys don't get to say. So my point is that even though Game Pass may look one way with a certain set of glasses on it, right? When you talk about total cost accounting, Game Pass is consuming resources. And so I'm not going to go into the exact numbers for each of these line items, but when we just talk about costs, right, that are associated with Game Pass, you know, one thing is development, right? So Game Pass has an app. That app shows up on your desktop. That app is not being done by nobody, right? That cost is not zero. There's cost to build that app, roll that app out, integrate that app with the store. And the other thing we don't know is, as you see the rise of the storefront via Game Pass and the lessening of importance of the Microsoft Store itself, I don't know that that Game Pass team is just maintaining both, right? Because the amount of maintenance that's being done on the Microsoft Store is really, really, really small right now in comparison to Game Pass. So those costs could be collected on there. I didn't do that in my math calculations, but I'm just throwing that out as a possibility. Then you have data centers, right? So Microsoft is investing in building out data centers. One would think that the total cost to roll out Game Pass globally, which includes Xbox Cloud Gaming, right, is part of the cost that it takes to make Game Pass go, and that some of the investment that was made for building out data centers over the last few years included space that's occupied by Game Pass. So from a total cost accounting perspective, I would allocate the cost to part of the cost to build out those data centers, and I would amortize that right over some period of time. So I put data center build cost in there, and I just assumed it just to make it pretty level that it was the cost to build out one data center. Microsoft has built out a crap ton more than one data center over the last 5 years, right? But I just allocated one to Game Pass. Then you have data center O&M. Then you have accounting. This is another thing that people probably aren't thinking about. General thumb rule for a business is for every $1 billion of revenue that I have to have 5 FTEs in my finance and accounting department. Therefore, if Game Pass is running about $3 billion of revenue, I have to have 15 FTEs for accounting, for billing, for maintenance of the digital front, for people to make payments, yada, yada, yada. When you talk about the fact that Microsoft is making licensing deals with people with companies, and then has to then intake money and pay money out associated with those licensing deals, that takes people. So there's an accounting cost for those FTEs for that as well.
Yep.
There has to be some minimal. Yeah,
basically, cost of doing business, Hamp.
Exactly.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Right. There has to be some minimal level of customer tech support, right, for people who have problems with Game Pass. So that's a cost from IT. The IT department is not just going to suck up the fact that they have to provide that, however little it might be, at zero cost. They're going to identify that as a cost and charge it to the Game Pass P&L center. Then this is a big one in here, and then there's bandwidth. You look at the cost for long haul transport and last mile transport, right? And I looked at the cost that it takes to move basically a gigabyte of data. Since there's an innumerable variation of possible scenarios under which that data has to be moved to both download games from Game Pass and to serve them out over Xbox Cloud Gaming, I just took some flat level loads and peanut buttered that across the total cost. Looked at the total number of games that are in Game Pass, the total number of gaming instances basically that people would consume in a year to equate to the revenue, and that gave me a bogey for bandwidth, right? Again, what a lot of people like to say and what a lot of people will try to say is they will try and say, hey, Microsoft is a cloud company. They consume bandwidth anyway. That's no real cost to Game Pass. That's not true. If Game Pass has to move a terabyte of data, that terabyte of data is being moved for the purpose of Game Pass. That is data that would not be moved if Game Pass did not exist. Therefore, under total cost accounting, you have to allocate costs to moving that bandwidth. Then, in addition to the desktop app development, I put a bogey in here for every other app development, right? The fact that Game Pass has a mobile app on both iOS, on Android, right? And that it's accessible via the browser on iOS. And then therefore that has to be maintained because those operating systems move, because those browsers move, because kernels change, because new security implementations come up that can break your app. And so some number of people have to invest time in making those apps constantly work. Then here's another one that people like to dispense with, and that's marketing. So the fact that you see Game Pass plastered all over the web, all over gaming magazines, all sorts of commercials that run on GameStop, on YouTube, all over the place. That requires money, and that's money that's allocatable to that cost center. It's not just, oh, by the way, marketing. Well, we had to run marketing for Xbox, so it's no cost to Game Pass. No, if that marketing is emblazoned with Game Pass iconography, then that's a marketing cost that has to be accounted for. And so basically, and then I think my last thing that I put on there is the other thing that people sometimes forget is they're paying licensing deals in most cases up front to gain properties to put in Game Pass, but then they're also paying royalty incentive payments, right, for consumption. And so that has to also be a bogey. When you set a budget out at the beginning of the year, generally what you're going to do is you're going to allocate a certain amount in that bucket, right? You don't know how much you're going to pay out. You don't know how much you're going to save, but you're going to allocate a bogey, right, for that, because you have to, because people who run P&L centers have to do a thing called AOP, and you have to turn in your budget and earning plan for the year in order to be consumed by the finance department and the CFO in order to roll up and issue aggregate guidance, right, by the company for each quarterly earning period. So at the end of the day, I rolled all this up. I allocated numbers to it. My guess right now in this model, and again, I don't care if you agree with the number or not, I'll put the model out. You can go slide the rule right for any of these variables that you want, is that at this scale right now, they're spending about $4 billion to run Game Pass. Right.
And by the way, Ham, just real quick, you were. This is important too, an important thing to mention here, because this is. You're not saying that this is in fact 100% true, right? Like this is kind of like your estimation of what you think costs might be, and then, and how much they might be spending to run Game Pass, and right, like that's
right. So people can use the model.
Yeah, real quick, I'm sorry, real quick. I want to bring that up because, like, that's important, because we're not out here saying that this is a fact. How many times do we see this on Twitter? with other podcasts, like, oh yeah, this is. I'm having this conversation with somebody right now about the CMA. Oh, this is fact. They're biased. So there's no, to borrow your word, there's no rubric here. They don't have any to back up their claims. But I just wanted to highlight that because that's not something that we, at least I don't think we do. And if we do, please call us out on it. I don't think that that's something we engage in where we are misleading or making statements of fact without actually having all the numbers per se in this case, right? So this is just an estimation, which is, again, just something I wanted to point out that was important to mention that. So
yeah, and quite honestly, the estimation isn't as important as the model, right? The main reason I put the models together is because you have so many people who talk in absolutes, and what they want to say is that, well, the cost is zero. And my whole point is, maybe I'm talking in the other absolute, right? My point is to say, I don't know what these additional costs are, but these are the additional costs at a minimum, and they're not zero. So I don't care if you want to say that they're spending $2.1 billion to run Game Pass, but my point is to don't sit here and look me in the face and tell me, well, they're not paying anything to run those workloads on cloud. Because that's not the case. Even when a company, this is why you have things in people who are parts of companies and corporations should know this, you probably have something called a shared resource center, right? And the reason for the shared resource center to exist is because corporate operations is not a P&L center. It doesn't generate revenue. It just sucks up cost. And it sucks up cost based on a ratio of how big the business is. I talked about the more $1 billion of revenue that we have, that the more people we have to have in accounting, the more employees I have, the more people I have to have in HR, the more people I have to have in talent acquisition, right? The bigger contracts I win, the more people I have to have in contracts. Like all of these things compile, right, in some type of mathematical relationship to how big your business is. And again, the costs aren't zero. Even if I consume a service that another portion of my corporation is providing, we still cost account for that, right? Because at the end of the day, I've got a cloud engineer over there earning $200,000 a year, plus whatever they're being paid for benefits, time off, PTO, etc. And I have to count for that $350,000, right, of cost. And if part of that cost accounting is X percentage of that person's time is they're working on cloud engineering workloads to support Game Pass, that's still a cost. That cost isn't zero. Like I said, a lot of people want to run around and say that, those things are zeroed out. They don't matter. They absolutely do matter. If you've ever been in a conversation with a CFO and you've ever actually put pen to paper and worked these spreadsheets, right, that have to be provided, that eventually roll up to report guidance for publicly owned and publicly traded companies, then you would know that these variables are factors in reality and that they do exist. And we don't just wave our hands and wipe things away and say that, oh yeah, don't worry about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, I'm glad you brought up that this isn't, we're not speaking in absolutes here. It's just more of a model to kind of give maybe a little bit of insight to how these things work. But real quick, Hip, I do want to, before I forget, somebody just gave us a super chat, so I want to get to that real quick. The great Borbor Contri, I don't know why I say great, but his name's great, I think. Even though I don't agree with Borbor all the time, I do like his name. Borbor Contri with the $2 super chat says, gaming sites, clowns concerning operating income. Thank you for that, Borbor. I appreciate it. Oh my goodness. And
just to extrapolate off this point, right? That's a thing. Like if you're and people have spoken to us who have expressed this this sentiment, and so I appreciate it. And I just want to reflect it. If you're watching this show, right, more than others particularly, if you're watching this show in an effort to glean some additional information, right, to learn some things that you can platform off of, to go do additional research, right, and my point is to gain more knowledge, right, instead of listening to propaganda, then when you see these financial terms, one of the things to key on is that they're different. They mean things, right? Operating income is just not a casual financial term, right? Revenue is not a casual financial term. Gross income, gross profit margin, net income, profit and gross profit and profit margin are three completely different mathematical terms, right? And they're all calculated differently, and not all companies present them all. right? I talked about Sony, who tried to kind of pull a wackadoodle, right, in their last earnings report, and what they pointed to in terms of negativity was I think net income or operating income, one of those two, right? And what they didn't do is they didn't reflect a negative impact on profits, even though at the end of the day there was an impact on profits, right? They chose the financial parameter to point to that was less impactful from a PR perspective. And so there's one thing that you should recognize, and like we've said on this show many times before, lots of people run around and say record revenue, record profits, right? And again, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? If it costs me $3, if it takes me $3 in revenue today to make $2 in profit, right? That's different than if it costs me $5 in revenue, right, next week to make 50 cents a profit, right? And there's calculations that are involved in evaluating what that says about the financial health of a company. So those terms I think are sometimes looked at very casually and kind of glossed over, and like they don't make a big difference. But like again, this now I'm starting to get amped up. This is what I talk about. Amp. This is what I talk about when we converse about things on Twitter and in a public space, and quite frankly, we make ourselves look dumb, right? The corporations think that we're dumb, and therefore the corporations put out terms, right, like those financial parameters that they pick and choose to, again, pull a wackadoodle, right, and make things look either not as dire as they actually are, or not as dire as they actually are, or way more positive than they should actually be taken, right? Because their belief is that people aren't going to go look up what is the actual definition of net income, right? What is the actual difference between gross profit, profit margin, and profit, right? So, again, just throwing that out that, when you see a statement, particularly what happens is, I'll get off my soapbox. So hopefully this is last thing. When earnings reports come around, what I would highly, highly, highly suggest is don't go to website X, right? Particularly biased website X, Tom Warren, Destin Legary, some other authors, Forbes, I can't even remember the name of the Bloomberg. Don't look at those and read the synopsis. Go to the actual investors page of the actual corporation, read the earnings statement, this statement, right? And then if you want a quicker digest, look at the PowerPoint presentation, right? That they used as their talking points for when they actually did the call, right? The PowerPoint presentation is still a little distilled, but it will glean some highlights probably faster than you going through the earnings statement itself. But just like, there are some websites that do a good job of presenting those earnings statements and just report the news. There are a lot of websites that report those earnings statements and compile their own evaluations into them. And sometimes there are ones who are okay, but then sometimes there are ones that are just bad. And I would say the best way to insulate yourself from that is just go to the corporation, go to the investor relations site and look through the PowerPoint yourself. If you don't sit there and listen through the actual audio presentation itself.
Which is why when I read stuff, I'm always asking who, what, where, and why. Wise words to live by the way. No, that's a great point, Hamp. And thank you for sharing that model, by the way. I wasn't sure if you wanted to share that, but no, I certainly appreciate it. Yeah, and so that was Monday. Today's Wednesday, and today we have even more conversation about D&B, by the way. Tactical Gamer with the $2 super chat says D&B, Duns and Bradstreet, D&B. Thank you for that, Tactical Gamer. I'm
sorry, Brad. Can I read?
Yeah.
So Andrew Makala puts in the chat, the numbers that came out don't include PC Game Pass or any DLC and microtransactions for Game Pass. So what is that based on? Does it say that in the slide? The slide, which is, by the way, is uncorroborated and not proven to be credible at this point. Because it hasn't been corroborated, I haven't looked at the slide in intensive detail. It's only reported what was sent to the Brazilian regulatory agency by Microsoft that this is what Game Pass made, but there's no breakdown that I'm aware of any numbers
or anything that would say it doesn't include PC Game Pass or DLC or microtransactions from Game Pass. Like, I don't know. I mean, like, Andrew, like, do you know for a fact that that's the case, that those numbers that came out don't include those things? Like, I'm not saying you're wrong, but if that's, like, provide a link or some source for that. But I didn't see that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just right again, kind of where people are jumping off the assumption pier about these things. Again, I asked the question just to kind of maybe prove my point, but I don't know that it even matters because, again, the slide isn't corroborated yet.
Well, but I think that's kind of the like you said, jumping off the assumption pier. That's what tends to happen when you have this conversation. And that's kind of what happened with my conversation about the CMA today, which that came out. Microsoft's response to the CMA. And actually, let's dive into that real quick. So this came out this morning. Microsoft accuses UK regulator of adopting Sony's complaints over Activision Blizzard deal. All right. So here's what Microsoft is saying. So the CMA on Wednesday detailed in full its reasoning for its concerns, including the impact of competition in the console gaming stream and subscription spaces. So the CMA is officially expanded to the second phase, again, due to a number of antitrust concerns. Now, when you say this, Hamp, people are like, "Oh, this is not there's clear bias here. The CMA is acting differently. They're not acting." Let me just pull something up here real quick. Speaking of the CMA, so I've cited this quote by the CMA. The CMA is currently investing. Hopefully they're not investing. That'd be an issue. They're investigating. They're investigating Amazon right now. They're investigating Amazon's marketplace. And Sarah Cadell's general counsel at the CMA said this: millions of people across the UK rely on Amazon services for fast delivery of all types of products at the click of a button. This is an important area, so it's right that we carefully investigate whether Amazon is using third-party data to give an unfair boost to its own retail business, and whether it favors sellers who use its logistics and delivery services, both of which could weaken competition. Thousands of UK businesses use Amazon to sell their products, and it's important they are able to operate in a competitive market. Any loss of competition is a loss of consumers and could lead them to paying more for products being offered lower quality items or having less choice. Now, where have we heard these words before, Hamp?
Yeah, it sounds. Just swap the names for the corporations, and it sounds like a lot of their findings for the about the initial investigation in the Microsoft Activision deal.
And so, that being said, would you say their behavior is consistent with?
Yep,
with Microsoft Activision? I mean, it's like
and consistent with the past 15 years of history of litigation and trade reviews in the EU, which up until recently included the UK. So yeah, none of their findings sound anything to me like any of the findings that weren't the cause of GDPR, weren't the cause of Google Maps being ousted out of France and Google actually pulling out of France almost in its entirety for a period of time. They're not anything like the EU's. They're not anything unlike the EU's concerns over the use of privacy data by Facebook. For its, like, all of it sounds consistent. I mean, you and I talked today, and the fact of the matter is that the EU, much more so than the US, has a tendency to lean towards techno fear, and that is what drives a lot of their compliance framework and rules and a lot of their findings over the last few years. And so this is nothing new. As I've said before, when this whole thing started, right, and we talked about trying to describe for everyone what the atmosphere is around a lot of nations right now for the big tech five. And again, Microsoft is in the big tech five: Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Apple. If any of those five companies move a muscle in a country, they get scrutiny. That's just the way things are right now. So again, a regulatory agency, particularly one in Europe, right? This should not be a surprise. And it should not be met with the type of kind of ludicrous conspiracy theory, flat earther kind of approaches that we're hearing these things being received by the gaming community.
Yeah, like when I see people say they're a bit biased. Well, how? How are they biased? I just read to you the verbiage from their investigation of Amazon, and it is identical. Like Hamp said, if you just swap out the names of the corporations, swap out Amazon for Microsoft or Sony, it's the same verbiage. Again, and it's the same mission statement. It's the same mission statement. It's consistent. I don't, like, what are we doing here? Please, somebody explain to me what we're doing here.
Yeah,
I mean,
this
like,
is
like people are like, oh, well, provide proof. I just did provide proof.
Right, and we and we talked about another one earlier today, and I found it, right, and I brought up the fact that, you know, this was one of the things that, again, went into the air, and what I've been trying to express to people is, look, when you've got one deal, right, underneath a regulatory agency's nose, and another thing is going on that casts you in a bad light, that is going to have influence and impact on what that regulatory agency is doing. Right. So here, it reported in Reuters on the 1st of April of this year, Microsoft's cloud business targeted by EU antitrust regulators. EU antitrust regulators are quizzing Microsoft's rivals and customers about its cloud business and licensing deals. A questionnaire seen by Reuters showed in a move that could lead to a formal investigation and renewed scrutiny of the U.S. software company. So this was before an investigation went down, but the point is that the EU antitrust regulators had a whiff and a scent, and we're going out and we're letting that dog hunt to see if they could turn up anything. The European Commission has fined Microsoft a total of 1.6 billion euros in the previous decade for breaching EU antitrust rules and for not complying with its order to halt anti-competitive practices. Again, findings and results over the last decade that formulate the opinion of regulatory agencies in that geographical, geopolitical, geoeconomic area that influence the rulings and the findings that they're arriving at now. The company found itself on the EU competition enforcers radar again after German software provider Nextcloud, France's OVH Cloud, and 2 other companies filed complaints about Microsoft's cloud practices. Again, middle-tier cloud providers are a specific competitive bracket that the EU and the UK are looking at to make sure that they have the opportunity to compete and are not being crowded out by Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. The Commission has information that Microsoft may be using its potentially dominant position in certain software markets to foreclose. Is that becoming a really familiar term? Is everybody starting to get comfortable with that? Because it keeps coming up. Markets to foreclose competition regarding certain cloud computing services, the questionnaire said. Guess what else is a cloud computing service? Xbox Cloud Gaming. Regulators asked if the terms in Microsoft's licensing deals with cloud service providers allow rivals to compete effectively. They also want to know if companies needed Microsoft's operating systems and productivity applications to complement their own cloud infrastructure offering in order to compete effectively. This is where those regulatory bodies are looking at Microsoft's adjacencies and their ability to leverage them. The question and the path that they were going down here was, hey, when you go to compete for cloud, are people not interested because you're not able to bundle, another term that I used earlier in this conversation, because you're not able to bundle Microsoft operating systems and Microsoft Office with your cloud offering, which you would guess they probably charge a higher price for, right, to those middle tier cloud compute companies who are their competition than they charge directly to customers when they're trying to sell their own cloud computing capability. So again, these are things that a lot of people blow by, and ignore, right?
Yeah.
Largely because they don't come by their windshield because they don't see them, because their path of the stuff that they look up, not that they look anything up. Typically, they just
they're not looking
see things driving by.
They're not looking stuff up. What they're doing is they're seeing what like X Gamer Plus on Twitter saying about the regulatory agency, the CMA, or what X YouTuber is saying about the regulatory of the CMA, or they're listening to Pony Nation about Game Pass being profitable or not. They're not going to reliable sources. They're stuck in this echo chamber, and that's where they're getting their information from, and they're not even bothering trying to understand how the regulatory process works. Look, man, I don't claim, I'm not the smartest person in the world. I don't claim to be. My wife might think I am on some days. On other days, not so much. But I took the time because I was like, you know what, I want to see what's going on here. I've never heard of the CMA prior to this deal, and so I want to get a better understanding of past decisions they've made, because there was so much conversation around bias. Are they biased? I'm like, wait a minute, like, you're like, yeah, this doesn't add, like, this bias argument just doesn't add up. So what I do, I went and I researched, and this is why I brought up I'm going to beat a dead horse here, but this is why I brought up the investigation of Amazon by the CMA, which, by the way, the European Commission is also looking into similar concerns with Amazon. And again, I'm going to read this. Per the CMA, millions of people across the UK rely on Amazon services, fast delivery, and all types of products at the click of a button. This is an important area, so it's right that we carefully investigate whether Amazon is using third-party data to give an unfair boost. Again, unfair boost to its own retail business, and whether it favors sellers who use logistics and delivery services, both which could weaken competition. That's what these regulatory agencies are looking at. The impact of competition, the impact of consumers. And in this quote, in these quotes, and they talk about, Sarah Cardell talks about less choice, the CMA. They talk about lower quality of items and less choice for consumers. Again, this isn't outside the bounds of what the CMA does. And right. This is as easy as a quick Google search. Like, it's amazing. And here's my rant, by the way, Hamp, which I told you was going to happen. We have the internet. A click Google search. You have a keyboard, for crying out loud. You have a search. You have something that does all the work for you. It's not like you have to go back to the library and pull out the Encyclopedia Britannica and look something up, or go to the library. You have Google. You have Bing. You have the internet. This stuff is out there. You know, and then we got like Andre Clay, I mean, you know, I look, man, and you're a reliable source. Yeah, actually I am, more so than you, sir, because I actually took the time to research it. I actually took the time to learn and understand how the process works. But this is part of the problem. People just want to argue. They don't want to do any research. And then when you say the sky's blue, they yell at you and say, "Why are you defending the sky being blue?"
And I think Andrew Clay, and I'm not even sure if that was pointed at us or if that was jabbed at somebody else in the chat. I don't know. I think one of the big points, Andrew, is if you don't believe that we're a reliable source, and again, I don't know that I really care that anybody does or not. One of our huge points is when you hear us talk about any subject or any topic, most of the time you will hear us citing another source. So if you don't believe that we ourselves are a source, then we're giving you, right, pointers and indicators to go off and go look that information up yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean, the CMA has fined pharmaceutical companies for unfair practices. I mean, like, what they're doing isn't out of character, and you have people out there saying that. And then when you ask them, well, how are you arriving to this conclusion? Well, no, the burden of proof is on you, BRAP. No, it's not, because I'm not the one out there saying that they're biased. I'm telling you how the process works, and that is it.
Right, and the thing to bolt onto the backside of that is, you know, we have a lot of people running around taking. Right. This was my concern when the Brazilian finding came out. Again, the Brazilian finding, not the first set of findings that were put out. Saudi Arabia was first, right? But people are latching onto the Brazilian one, and it is the proof paper, right? It's the white paper that people are running around and saying, see, this is what all of them should be saying. And that's not true. Because again, I made reference to geopolitics, geoeconomics, right? Different regulatory agencies and different bodies have different perspectives and different mentalities based on things that go on in their countries, based on the evolution of industry. I believe they still teach the Industrial Revolution in high school, right? We understand.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so.
we should understand that economies and industries evolve, and that they are cultural evolutions, and not simply mathematical evolutions, right? And so different countries, based on what's going on in those nations, based on what's going on financially in those nations, have different perspectives. Brazil needs a lot of help to make its economy go. Things down there are very expensive. There are reasons that there are electronics manufacturing plants in Brazil, right? Because it's hella expensive to import things into that country. And so in many cases, large corporations will stand up infrastructure in Brazil, and Brazil's government will help foster that. And so their lens through which they look at things is going to be different than the EU's, which has plenty of competition, which has a particular nit in the fact that all of the big tech companies on the planet right now are American, right? You don't know of a big European-founded cloud company. I can't name one, right? And when I look past the US companies, the next ones that I look at are the Chinese companies, Alibaba, Tencent, right? And so the EU has an interest in protecting its economy and protecting its consumers that has a different tilt to it than Brazil does. And so therefore I would expect the CMA's findings to be very similar to the EU's findings. I would expect the CMA and the EU's findings to be pretty significantly different from Brazil's findings. And I wouldn't hold up the Brazil piece of paper as a proof concept of how all of the additional ruling agencies, regulating agencies will fall in line with across the planet. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. The FTC's findings are probably going to be significantly different than Brazil's findings, right?
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, from the FTC optic, and forgive the language, they ain't got to put up with that shit. Right?
Yeah.
They're US companies, right? There's a different dynamic. There's a different set of optics to it. So
yeah, and you know, one of the things I'm seeing is one of the things that was mentioned to me was somebody said, well, you know, do you think that you know, the CMA's right or wrong because every other regulatory agency in the world is you know, is in the opposite of them? And I'm like, well, no, I mean, yeah, that's to be expected because that tends to happen. We have examples of that. One of the things you mentioned to me was Windows. I think you mentioned that when Windows boots up in the EU, you have a choice of browsers or something. I think it was. I don't remember.
Right.
Yeah, and but why did that happen though? That doesn't happen here in the U.S.
Right, because their antitrust findings in 1999-2000 yielded harsher compliance rules than they were given in the United States.
Yeah. The other thing too is, I'm going to poke at people's logic, and I'm going to have fun with this because, like, I see people saying like, hey, the CMA is, using the UK tax dollars to argue over a game publisher that bought another company and they're protecting $1 billion corporation. It's like, so you're saying on one hand the CMA is protecting $1 billion corporation, but then what are you saying about the $1 trillion corporation then? Like, you're saying that if that deal goes through, it's a win for them, right? And but if the deal doesn't go through, it's a win for Sony. So you're saying that they're protecting, one? Yeah. I don't know, man. It's not about protecting. Okay, to an extent, it's about protecting competition, but it's not about winning or losing per se. With how the CMA is looking at this,
Yeah, it's not like they're feeling they're gonna rule in favor of Sony and friggin' Sony's gonna buy them big chicken dinners for a year.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, like, it's not about protecting the $1 billion company as much as it's about protecting competition.
It's about protecting competition, protecting trade, and protecting consumers.
Exactly.
And just and then the next foot to fall will be, that all of this is because we're in favor of Sony, right? And Mick Ice says, PS5 will sell 140 million units, Xbox Series 50 million units. I had to explain this to somebody who was trying to extrapolate what I was saying, my proof case about, I wouldn't make the assumption that Game Pass is profitable. Somebody was trying to say, well, you're trying to say the whole Xbox gaming division isn't profitable. I'm like, no, it's specifically, very ardently, not what I said. Right. And so to pick at what McIce is saying about PS5 will sell 140 million units, Xbox Series 50 million units. What I said to that individual is like, this is proof that you're taking a singular thing that I say as a singular data point and an anecdote and extrapolating some made up reality from it. What I have said about Microsoft and its Xbox Game Pass strategy is that it is one of the smartest things that I've ever seen them do, right? And it is begotten from a past history of doing the same thing. The entire Microsoft pivot has been about stopping its emphasis on operating systems, right, which used to be its cash cow and its breadwinner, and stopping its insistence that you run everything on Windows. And what they did was they pivoted out of that and they pivoted into becoming a tech agnostic enterprise services company, right? And I'll say that with some caveats. It's also another comment about here about how they're trying to drive, and they are trying to drive Azure, right? One of the reasons why this investigation by the EU into its cloud computing business fizzled out was because they adjusted cloud licenses. Because back in 2019, just as I suspected, right, they had raised the cost that they were charging to middle tier cloud providers for running Microsoft Office on their infrastructure, right, versus what they were charging people when you ran it on Azure. But my point is it's still at the end of the day, Microsoft has made a pivot out of the Ballmer years. It is a good pivot. I think that they are moving in a direction that is positive since Satya has taken over. I, again, am a personal Microsoft fan. I use Microsoft products. I have a Surface Pro 7. I had 6 Microsoft Windows phones. I had an AT&T Tilt, if you remember that old callback, right back before there was even Windows Phone. And so I've watched them as a business. I've studied them. I've studied Google. I've studied Amazon. I like what Microsoft is doing. It is very similar to IBM's pivot, right, and very similar to the antithesis of the failure that was RIM, because they failed to pivot when their strength was the fact that everybody loves their best BlackBerry Enterprise server and for its compliance with government cybersecurity regulations, right? And that's the only reason why they're even still a going concern as a business. But when we say these things, my personal desire isn't anything about like wanting to prove that Microsoft is losing. My desire is for there to be truth and some degree of level-headedness in the gaming conversation, and not to run off extrapolating some of these minor things as some proof point when all of the other evidence points to the likelihood that the opposite is true. And so I think Microsoft has made a great move with Game Pass. I'm a Game Pass subscriber. I'm a Game Pass Ultimate subscriber. I signed up in 2019 when they said that they were going day and date, and they moved it to PC Game Pass as well, because I wanted to be on the service for about a year before the new console came out. I like what Microsoft is doing overall as a business. I just simply don't believe that any of the quantitative data that's available says that Game Pass is profitable. I believe it's a loss leader strategy. I think that's a good strategy for Microsoft. I think it's a strategy that only Microsoft can do. Sony can't do it. And I think it provides incredible value to gamers, right? And it allows a lot of gamers to be in the economy that previously couldn't be because they can't afford to go out and buy 10 games a year at $60, $70 a pop.
Yeah, that's what I my rant earlier this week. That's what I talked about. Like, people are tearing down Game Pass. It's like, look, that's fine if Game Pass isn't your thing, but like we didn't have a lot of choice growing up. It was either buy a PC, buy a console, pay $50 for a game, and that was pretty much it. And I think what should be celebrated is the fact that whether it's a model that works for you or not, the fact that there's an opportunity for people to engage in gaming that may have not had the opportunity to do so. And that's actually not a bad thing for the industry. It's actually a good thing when you get more people into the industry playing, buying, consuming games. The other thing I want to mention real quick too is I do want to read some of the quotes by Microsoft, because one was kind of interesting. One quote by them was interesting as they replied to the CMA. But to that Andre Clay saying, "Oh no, they're protecting Sony." It's like, no, they're protecting. Again, it's really about protecting, like you said, trade, competition, consumer choice. But there's also one thing that people aren't, and I don't know, maybe because they haven't read what the CMA's some of the points the CMA concerns the CMA's brought up, but it's also about Microsoft leveraging its adjacencies to potentially be dominant or prevent future competition in the cloud gaming space. And that's an area that Sony really doesn't compete in. That's what they're looking at too. So it's not just oh, they're protecting PlayStation. They want PlayStation to be number one. No, it's they don't there's no, their only vested interest in this is protecting competition, fair trade, and again, consumer choice. And again, if you go back to the verbiage for their investigation of Amazon, they lay out the same thing. If you go to their website, if you go to, there are law firms that have written articles about the CMA, if you go, the UK law firms, to talk about how the CMA operates, what they're looking for, why they exist. You can kind of connect the dots here. But no, you're right, Hamp. Like, the purpose is to have a level-headed conversation, to subtract all the sensationalism and the hyperbole that goes around, and really just say, hey guys, here's what's happening. Here's how these regulatory bodies behave. Here's how companies react to these regulatory bodies. This is why they posture. I mean, how many times have we seen, that Jim Ryan is scared, or I can't believe Sony's doing it, they're crying. Well, yeah, no shit. I mean, they're going to do things to lobby these agencies like any other company would. I mean, you brought up the example of Hamp of Steve Jobs saying he's going to go thermonuclear to Android. We talked about the Apple Samsung lawsuits. Remember Tim Sweeney going crazy on Twitter talking about Apple. None of this should surprise anyone if you've been paying attention.
Right. And that's a good point to bring up, Strauss Zelnick's comments this week, mentioned, and again, I haven't had a chance to watch the entire interview. But one of the sound bites that's going around Twitter is that he said he feels like the move is good. Right. And infers and alludes to a lot of the concerns that I've had and a lot of the, I hate to use the term predictions, but a lot of the projections that I've made, right? I think consolidation is going to continue. I think we're going to get to a point where there's mass consolidation. And I think part of the reason for that is because production costs are spiraling upwards. They're spiraling upwards not because of what the gaming companies are doing. They're spiraling upwards because of consumer demand. Because gamers are inherently unsatisfied, because we're constantly asking for more ray tracing, more frames, because even though people supposedly champion indies, right, and ballyhoo, right, $70 games, etc., what sells and what people talk about, and quite frankly, what you listen to a lot of these podcasts, right, this term banger, right, which wasn't really a term, right, in the social media tapestry, 2 or 3 years ago, right, but it's become one of the most prevalently used terms today because everybody's stacking bangers. When you talk about this foolish war, this silly war of words between Sony fans and Microsoft fans, what inherently gets compared is bangers. None of them get any credit for having Stray or Power Wash Simulator. Now, quite frankly, I haven't played Power Wash Simulator. It's not a game that necessarily interests me, right? But it is a game that is other, right? It is a game that is not part of the race towards stockpiling of thermonuclear weapons, right, by both camps. And so what I think is that third-party publishers who are particularly caught in this pinch, right, they're the ones who have to put that stuff out to be competitive on platforms because they're not platform owners. Because just like on a Formula One team where your primary competitor is the other driver on the team, the primary competitor that these companies face when they deploy a game on a platform is the platform owner. That is what their big AAA games are up against for people's time. They don't get a lot of credit and they don't get a lot of scratch for deploying indies on platforms. They try to do it, I think, because they are patrons of the art and want to see the art evolve. But the fact of the matter is that, companies don't get paid as much money for putting Stray on a platform, right, as they do for putting a Call of Duty on a platform or a Saints Row on a platform. And so costs are going to continue to spiral upwards. The need and desire to satisfy that big summer blockbuster level of game, right, on platforms is going to continue. And it's just going to get to a point where it becomes an untenable financial position for those big third-party publishers for the amount of overhead and capital base that they have to carry, which is what has happened to Activision, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't think we're seeing the last big sale. I expect over the next few years, I expect Ubisoft to go somewhere. I expect EA to go somewhere. I expect Take-Two to be the final holdout, right? And I think we're gonna see an eradication of this notion of the independent third-party publisher, that they're all gonna start to coalesce around platform owners. Right, and then the industry is going to be different, and then what the next stage of evolution is after that, I'm not sure, but I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. I knew we talked about that earlier today, and I don't know how I feel about mass consolidation. I don't know. That doesn't always sit well with me per se. I'm always worried about how that might impact consumer choice, but we'll see. Let me just read off some of the Microsoft's response to the CMA for going to the second phase of. Or phase 2. Microsoft does not agree with the CMA moving this to phase 2. Microsoft has said that the suggestion that the incumbent market leader with clear and enduring market power could be foreclosed by the third largest provider as a result of losing access to one title is not credible. And they also say while Sony may not welcome increased competition, it has the ability to adapt and compete. They also say Sony PlayStation has been the largest console platform for over 20 years, with an install base of over 150 million consoles, make it larger than Nintendo and more than double the size of Xbox. Sony engages in conduct today, which is reflective of its market power in console gaming, including, I thought this was, we talked about this earlier, including increased prices of its console without fear of losing market share. I think there's some truth to that, Hamp. And I think part of that's because Sony knows the demand of their platform. Or demand for their platform. The suggestion that the incumbent market leader will clear an enduring market power could be foreclosed by third-party providers as a result of, we talked about this. There are more than 4,000 games available on PlayStation alone. So they added that to the paragraph I read before that. The evidence shows that less than, and some of this is redacted, it looks like. Shows that less than whatever of PlayStation's monthly active users are playing Call of Duty. Even without all of those gamers, a highly improbable outcome from a hypothetical foreclosure strategy, the PlayStation gamer base would remain significantly larger than Xbox is today. By the way, none of this response surprising me from Microsoft, by the way, Hamp. Carefully crafted by attorneys. Since the transition was announced, Sony's acquired several game studios. Microsoft has talked about this, including Bungie, developer of the popular online game Destiny 2, Haven Studios, Savage Games, minority interest in From Software, developer of the largest game of 2022. I like how they pointed that out. Largest game of 2022, Elden Ring, among other hit games. This complements Sony's existing minority shareholdings at Epic Games, publisher Fortnite, strong first-party game catalog, and extensive portfolio of exclusive arrangements within third-party publishers. Therefore, we're over at 280 exclusive first and third-party titles on PlayStation 1 in 2021, nearly 5 times as many as Xbox. The CMA provides no evidence that rivals rely on Microsoft's multi-product ecosystem for cloud gaming. Microsoft actually said this too, which I thought was interesting, Hamp, that Microsoft believes the CMA's concerns here are flawed as currently Microsoft Xbox cloud gaming service does not use Azure. It does not stream games from PC hardware. I thought they were using Azure.
Yeah, did you? I was asking you for the. I saw that in a JPEG, so I wasn't. Is that from the Microsoft website?
Yeah, it looks like it's from the Tom Warren thing that Tom Warren posted.
Yeah, I have not been able to drill down to where Warren actually pulled that from. So I'm not.
But yeah. What else? Consumer adoption of cloud gaming remains low. Harming or degrading rival services would decisively set back adoption of this technology, protecting leading incumbents, i.e. Sony on console, Apple and Google on mobile, as well as Steam on PC. Xbox as a platform, which is in last place in console, 7th place in PC, and nowhere in mobile game distribution globally, has no incentive to do this. Instead, its incentive is to encourage the widespread adoption of cloud gaming technologies, which, by the way, still benefits them, right? By as many providers as possible to encourage a major shift in consumer behavior required for cloud gaming to succeed. Microsoft has no intention to take away Call of Duty away from gamers, and indeed is publicly committed not to do so. Now, the CMA actually listed and cited instances where Microsoft made acquisitions of publishers. They mentioned ZeniMax, Bethesda, where those games went exclusive. But I thought it was kind of odd. The CMA actually didn't bring up, and I thought this was interesting. They did. I don't, and I could be wrong. If they did mention this, please someone let me know. But I didn't see them mentioning anything that anything regarding Minecraft, because Minecraft was a huge IP and they kept that multiplat. But Microsoft's saying that they have no intention. They're doubling down again, saying, "Hey, we have no intention to take away Call of Duty from gamers." And I believe that. I don't think that Microsoft is going to take away Call of Duty. I do think, though, there will be incentives for people to play Call of Duty on Game Pass, and that could be like maps and maybe skins, things like that. And they say the value of Call of Duty depends on its community of gamers, which I agree with, the majority of whom are on PlayStation. Keeping Call of Duty on PlayStation is therefore a commercial imperative for the Xbox business and the economics of the transaction. I don't disagree with that. As much Microsoft has offered Sony a contractual commitment to continue supplying it with Call of Duty, including new releases with feature and content parity. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that was part of the offer. The referral decision fails to explain why, in the CMA view, Microsoft would make such commitments publicly and privately, which are reflected in its internal documents, if it had no intention of honoring them. Foreclosure strategies of the type outlined in the referral decision would alienate the Call of Duty gamer base and tarnish both the Call of Duty and Xbox brands, undermining the rationale for the transaction. Microsoft will place at risk over USD, and that's been redacted, in annual revenue from sales of Call of Duty on PlayStation. By the way, somebody said that somebody in live chat said that the CMA is unprofessional because they put these scissor emotes in there. That's where we're going here, Hamp. Can you believe that? Shit, man. Oh my God. An annual revenue from sales of Call of Duty on PlayStation, as well as substantial revenues from other Xbox games distributed via PlayStation. Microsoft has been clear that it's counting on revenues from the distribution of Activision Blizzard games on Sony PlayStation. So I mean, again, I don't think Microsoft is going to go back on this. I think there's a business case for them to keep, and we've talked about this on this show, that it makes sense for them to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation, and make it multi-platform. I think was it Matt Booty said they want to even get maybe Call of Duty on Nintendo as well. I'd have to go back and look that up, but I thought he said something to that effect. But
I mean, lots of them have said different stuff, and even I take things that are said with a certain grain of salt, right? Because they may mean one thing, but they may mean something different, right? When it comes time to actually making the decision. I think in conjunction with that comment, and I think a few other ones that I saw in the chat, and hopefully that my point of disagreement isn't taken too far, because I think this is said by some of my allies in the chat. The notion that Microsoft is going to take it and send it exclusive, they might. But the mathematical argument against that is let's just take, what I've said before is, if you take Activision's $8 billion in revenue and in gaming, right, in revenue, combine it with Microsoft's revenue in gaming, they reach parity with PlayStation. Maybe they're $1 billion or $2 billion ahead, right? If let's just say, right, for taking swag, big numbers, let's just say half of that is due to Call of Duty, $4 billion. If Microsoft sends it exclusive, Microsoft loses that entire $4 billion of revenue, right? Maybe some of those PlayStation consumers will go play it on Xbox. Maybe they'll go play it on PC. I don't know. But out of the gate, it's just a flat out loss, right, of that revenue. Sony is only going to lose the 30% take that they take of that revenue. So the impact to Microsoft is actually much larger by sending an exclusive than it is to Sony, at least at face value. The other thing is, people have mentioned, and again, I'm not throwing jabs at your personal tastes, but a lot of people have mentioned, they would much rather prefer, right, those SIE template kind of games than Call of Duty, and they're not really worried about, they could care less if Call of Duty comes off the PlayStation platform. And I get that, and I understand it, and I fully respect people with those tastes. What I'd say is understand that there's a very, 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 very large part of the market that doesn't feel that way, right?
Yeah.
So, right, those are people who, if it's pulled off the PlayStation platform, right, will either go play it elsewhere or will go play something else. Some of those people are going to probably be satisfied, right, with some of the live service games that Sony has in production pipeline. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I've pointed out, when it comes to battle royales, especially, is, and I know that we have some people in our circle who will always say gamers go where the games are, but I think the larger reality with concern about those PvP competitive multiplayer online games is gamers go where the other gamers are, right? even when the game is kind of mediocre and not that great, right? People go to where there's the largest coalescing of bodies, right? Because they hate things like matchmaking taking a long time. They hate things like going into lobbies that aren't fully populated. They hate, right, going into games where there's not a lot of competition and a lot of variance, and where there are problems by not having a center of mass, right, of the population. This is why you only get 2 or 3 battle royales that can really drive the market, right, and really stay on the market, right? Apex, Fortnite, and Warzone. And beyond that, right, everything's a pretty sharp drop off, right, in terms of revenue. So, you know, those are just some of the market factors out there. I think that's my perception, in my opinion.
Yeah. So my question about the emotes. So this guy's saying that CMA used blocked emotes on their Twitter post September 1st on their second phase statement. Okay, and like, why is that? I don't understand why that's like a deal.
I don't know. That sounds like somebody who thinks we didn't land on the moon.
I don't like why. What does that have to do with the investigation? Like I don't get it, man. I really don't. I really don't. Somebody asked me like what are my thoughts about the CMA's comments? Do you think they're right or wrong? I'm like, I just think they are what they are. It's not up to me to decide whether or not the regulatory agency who is investigating something I have no knowledge of, I can't determine whether what they're saying is right or wrong. It just is what it is. It is what it is because this is what they do.
Right. The people who would determine whether or not they're right or wrong, in air quotes, is their own legislation, who will decide whether or not they're overstepping their bounds. That's really the only. It kind of goes back to what I said, right, about this whole notion of sportsmanship and competition, right? People can make up mythological frameworks that they insist on judging everything by, and insist on believing that everyone should comply with, right? But the guardrails for a corporation are nothing other than, right, legality and regulatory compliance, right? And there were lots of arguments with me in the comments, right, about, you know, well, these companies have ethics, and everybody goes, yeah, again, sorry for the language, but just to put a fine point on it, no shit, right? I've taken 30 years, right, of annual ethics training in business, right, and all sorts of other compliance training and security training, right, for literally 30 years of my life, right? Well, I won't put an age on it, but since a very young age, since I would say in age before many of you even left home and went to college, right? I've been taking those courses. I get it, right? But what you will see if you parse those trainings is all of those trainings come back to what are the consequences of acting unethically, and all of them have a stick. That is what drives the content that goes in those trainings. If there's not a stick, it doesn't get given the premier placement that it gets in the training. There are some little things that are in there about like the CEO's, ethos is this and yada yada. But the ones that are the big ones are the ones that have a legal repercussion to them, and that's 99% of what's in the training, right? So we can all come back to this CMA discussion, this Brazil discussion about trying to adjudicate whether they're right or wrong. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is whether or not their own legislations in their home nation, right, not the international market. The CMA could give a crap about what Brazil said. What the CMA is concerned about is whether or not what their bounds are, what their guardrails are, right, whether or not they're overstepping them. And if they do overstep them, if there are legal repercussions to that, and whether or not Microsoft will sue or countersue.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, they may care about what Brazil said, because that may be used as evidence and ammunition, right, in the court case. But those things will be considered in terms of the legal relevance of them, not because Brazil said them.
Yeah, like, so this guy, yeah, and real quick, this guy says, you don't feel that a bit bias is classless? You don't think it's a bit bias in class for government to use blocked emotes? It's like they're having a laugh at Microsoft? Like, how we blocking it? Dude,
no, I think those people are much more adults than I'm sorry, than you're giving credit for.
These people are professionals, and I don't know where you're getting that from. That's like, that's the ultimate jump to conclusions, Matt. I need a jump to conclusions, Matt. It's like emo for the live chat. Yeah, but
we need a BRAP bingo card. This is an instance where
go ahead.
I think this is an instance where I think we're ascribing genius level malice to something that is probably much more explainable by incompetence. What you probably have is somebody who posted that stuff who's not familiar as much with the web or the internet or Twitter. And that's why, right, those emotes were used or not used, or something more appropriate wasn't used. At the end of the day, I think it's pretty immaterial, right, to the legal and actual regulatory issues that are going on.
That's exactly how I feel. Like, to me, it's inconsequential to everything else, because at the end of the day, they're still going to render a decision, and they're still going to do their investigation. I don't know how that, like, does that make him, like, I don't, like, what, how does that make him look like? I don't know, man. I don't understand that rationale. I don't look at the CMA as like being biased. I don't care. I understand why they exist. I understand what they do. I understand how they do it. That's it. I don't put any other additional thought into it.
And what I don't get with the rationale is, it's like, if a regulatory agency sides with Microsoft, then they're not biased. But if they side against them, then they are. Like, that makes no logical sense to any adult.
That was kind of my point, like earlier, by saying you're saying they're only protecting $1 billion company. So if they agree to the $1 trillion company's acquisition, are they then not protecting the $1 trillion company? Like, which one is it? You know what I mean? Like, right. It's just I don't, and I'm not saying they're trying. Look, I want to read something here real quick. Give me a second here. I need to find this. Oh, so one of the things, and by the way, again, you could pull up the CMA is published this online. You could pull up the document where they talk about their concerns. Part of the concern, they talk about cloud gaming. They talk about subscription services. They talk about Microsoft leveraging its adjacencies. People don't remember, like, it's not just about competition today. It's about competition in the future. I mean, go back to what they said about Amazon. I mean, Amazon's already here today, but it's about how Amazon's competing could potentially impact competition in the future. And that's what they're looking at too, with Microsoft leveraging its adjacencies and cloud and things like that. So they talk about, like, they think that in light of they say this, especially they say the CMA is concerned that having full control over this powerful catalog. They're talking about Game Pass and then adding ABK to the catalog of Game Pass. In light of Microsoft's already strong position in, I'm sorry, let me go back. The CMA is concerned that having full control over this powerful catalog, especially in light of Microsoft's already strong position in gaming consoles, operating systems, and cloud infrastructure, could result in Microsoft harming consumers by impairing Sony's closest gaming rival, ability to compete, as well as that of other existing rivals and potential new entrants who could otherwise bring healthy competition through innovative multi-game subscriptions and cloud game services. By the way, I will say this, as a consumer, I do agree with Satya. If it's about competition, let's have competition. Because I believe competition benefits consumers as well. But go ahead, man.
Absolutely. So one thing I want to understand, because I think part of our problem this week, is just understanding the lack of logic and rationality in the arguments. Right? I'm full on willing to listen to the arguments, but when I ask, right, what's the basis of them, or what's the logic behind them, we get what you said, right? The burden is on us to prove, right, logic and rationality. Logic and rationality is not assumed first. It's assumed, right, that they're being biased, or they're on the take, or they've accepted bribes, or whatever ridiculous conspiracy theory we're jumping to now. So shoot 'em ups in the chat says the CMA's argument is rubbish. So I'll ask you, since you're apparently willing to jump in front of the group and be the representative example, what is that based on? Right? The CMA's argument is rubbish. That's a qualitative statement, right? What is it based on, and what is it in comparison to? Is the thing that I don't understand. Would it not be rubbish if it was siding with Microsoft? Is that the rubric? Is that the yardstick? Is that the goalpost? I don't understand the single-threaded comment. Yeah. So if you want to drop that in chat, it would be wonderful to.
Well, the thing is, shoot 'em ups. First of all, look at his name, shoot 'em ups. Look, I'm not going to be nice about this anymore. Like, because again, if you're claiming bias, the onus is on you to provide some kind of evidence, information that in fact they're being biased. If I'm explaining to you what their concerns are, that's not me being biased towards Sony or PlayStation. That's just me telling you this is their concerns. But you know what? You're right, Hamp. No one is, as far as I know, no one has replied to me and said, this is why I think they're biased. Here's why, and laid out a case. It's all their bias.
Right. And this goes to what we always say, right? The problem in the gaming conversation and discourse on Twitter and other places, and even sometimes in our comments, is, look, I didn't say anything about bias. So I didn't ask you about bias, shoot 'em ups. You said CMA's argument is rubbish. That is a qualitative statement in comparison to some other adjective, right? And I'm asking you to expand on that explanation.
Look, I'm not going to be nice. He doesn't know what qualitative is.
Sorry.
No, he just doesn't. I mean, look, like he doesn't. He heard you the first time. But this is the problem. He doesn't have an answer. And this is part of the problem with this conversation. Like, people throw out these rubbish, biased accusations, and they don't back it up with anything.
Yeah, and I'll ask the same question of you, Andre Clay. The CMA have a clear bias towards Sony. What is that based on?
I mean, again, Andre, go back and listen to what I said, or the verbiage they use with their current investigation with Amazon. Interchange the companies with Microsoft or Sony. You'll see the consistency there. Like, I don't know how that's I'm struggling to understand how that's difficult to understand for someone.
And so Captain Platt says, given the $2 billion, it looks like Game Pass has to cost more. So I can't tell if he's referring to the $4 billion projection I gave for how much Amazon costs or Game Pass costs. That's $2 billion over the revenue it brings in, or whatever, or that eventually it's got to cost more for the player. Either one of which I agree with. Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Captain Ply, that I just expect over time, like every other service, that they're going to wind up increasing the cost of Game Pass subscribers. I don't go along with this notion, which I think is also to a certain extent a conspiracy theory, that it's going to become an overwhelming price increase, right? I expect the price increase to escalate over time in the same way that, our subscriptions to Amazon Prime have escalated, the same way that our subscriptions to Netflix have escalated. It's going to fall on some type of predictable paradigm, right? An increase of $5 every few years or something like that. What I don't know, I expect that's going to be the cost to consumers. A lot of people have said, one, they've argued that Game Pass is profitable. I've asked them to prove it or at least give me a projection, right? That they haven't done that. What I don't believe is I don't believe Eskimo. I don't believe Microsoft is doing a bait and switch. I don't think that they're giving people. I don't think they're pulling in Amazon. Right. And so if you've been studying the industry, one of the things with AWS, right, is that particularly in terms of their government sales, right, Amazon charged the government, right, a certain amount to get in the door and stand up government AWS. And then what they did is at a certain point along the chronology of that service, there was a balloon, right? And suddenly AWS services became way more expensive, right? And there was a feeling that it would be okay for them to do that because they thought they had vendor lock-in, right? I don't think that that's what Microsoft is doing to consumers. I don't expect the price of Game Pass to double over time, right? Off the first increment jump. So, I think it will be fine. I think people who enjoy Game Pass will be willing to absorb the incremental cost increase, price increase.
Yeah, go ahead. Let me chime in real quick. So Shoot 'em Up's replied, and this is Shoot 'em Up's. I don't disagree with you that, and I even said this when Jim Ryan talked about exclusive. I'm like Jim, come on, man. Like you guys have practiced in exclusivity for forever. It's a time-honored tradition in the industry. But what Shoot 'em Up's is saying is that the CMA is ignoring the very fact Sony has used the same market practice they are complaining about it in regards to the ABK deal. Again, I don't disagree with you that Sony has done things to lock up exclusive content. They all have. Nintendo, Microsoft, Sony, absolutely. Agree with you 110%. The problem is that people are looking at this in that scope, in that one instance of, okay, well, it's exclusivity, so that means it's apples to apples. Well, no, it isn't apples to apples.
Right. Let me. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if BRAP puts out a BRAP console, let's say I release the BRAP console, and I get NBA 2K as an exclusive, and Sony gets what was that game, Hamp, that was it NBA Jam? Was that remember that game, NBA Jam, the arcade game?
Yeah.
The arcade game where you do those crazy dunks, remember?
Yeah.
So let's say BRAP releases a console and I get NBA 2K as an exclusive. And Sony gets or Nintendo gets NBA Jam as an exclusive. In practice, yes, they're the same things, but the impact of those exclusives is different. And so that's the part that everyone ignores about this. Had the same conversation on Twitter today. Oh, why doesn't the CMA ask Sony about Spider-Man and Wolverine? Well, within the context of the gaming industry, those games don't have the same impact as Call of Duty. And how do we know this, Hamp? Because we see that we have the sales numbers. We know the revenue numbers. You compare those sales numbers, revenue numbers of COD to other AAA franchises, there's not many games that can do what COD does. So, look, I don't agree that Sony doesn't do the same practice of locking up exclusives, but the reason why this is being scrutinized is because of the impact that COD has on the industry.
Right, the scale.
The scale isn't the same. So I mean that's why this is being scrutinized.
Right. And so the findings aren't based on a tit for tat. They are based on looking at what they are based on looking at
do we need to take a break, man? Just the jury have to go back.
They are based on taking
just let it go, man. Let it go, Hamp. It's okay, man. Just let them have it.
They are based on taking a look at a $2 trillion plus company that has capabilities across a broad swath of enterprise and commercial technologies. Let's just put that statement in a box, right? That is the descriptive statement of Microsoft. Versus looking at a multi-billion-dollar, that is a software, cloud, and enterprise services company, I'll add. Right? And what we should all know and understand about the world today is that at the end of the day, you essentially have more capability as a software company than you do as a hardware company. Because I can scale software, I might argue almost infinitely, right? Much faster and much quicker than I can change hardware. I can scale software often on the exact same platform and infrastructure that already exists, right? But if we improve hardware, I have to build a new box. So let's encapsulate that, right? It's taking that versus the multi-billion-dollar electronics and entertainment company that is not a software company, that in fact buys some of their software capability from the multi-trillion-dollar company over here that we put in a box. And so it's a matter of scale. The point of the scale is that you say they're ignoring the very fact that Sony has used those very same market practices. And despite that fact, they have not scaled to anywhere near the size and capability of Microsoft. And in fact, in at least one console generation out of 3, Microsoft has maintained parity with them, despite being an overwhelmingly larger company. And in this generation, as far as we can tell, is maintaining pretty close parity with them in the gaming industry as well. And so that's why when you say they're using these same market practices, it's not a tit for tat, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, right? When I'm trying to think of a good analogy.
Well,
right?
and real quick, Camp.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this is the part that kind of drives me crazy. There's a clear difference too between buying a studio versus buying an entire publisher. I mean, just the scale of the publisher, especially Activision. And mind you, this is Microsoft's largest acquisition ever as a company. I mean, that's the difference of scope that we're talking about too. Like, it's one thing to buy, again, to buy a studio, to buy Bungie. It's another thing to buy an entire publisher. Like, they're not, the impacts of those things aren't the same.
Right. So,
and I don't know why that fact gets glanced over, or why people, I don't know. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, so Vulcan Vampire asks, the CMA should be even more favorable to Microsoft than Brazil was given Sony's market share. I think that is an argument, right, that could be had. Hey, it's healthier for consumers if we take a competitor and prop them up to be equally competitive against Sony. I wouldn't dismiss that. And again, I think part of the problem, right, in trying to just try and talk to people logically about this, I think in most cases, we're not saying, right, I'm not saying that the CMA has come down on a right finding. I'm saying that given the spectrum of places they could have landed, the place that they have landed is not invalid. The place that they have landed cites concerns that I myself would have, right? And like I said, I'm a proponent of Microsoft, right? As a student of the industry, I quite honestly am interested in seeing the acquisition go through, because I always want to see what happens next in the dance, right? But I can't take where the CMA has landed and look at that and call it invalid. And I don't see any evidence whatsoever that indicates that they have a reason to be biased towards Sony. They could come down. I agree. Yeah. They could come down on a finding that is pro Sony, but that doesn't mean that they're biased. Like that again, that feeling that they're biased is, let me just be straight out of it. Saying that they're biased, feeling that they're biased is a conspiracy theory, because if they're biased, it's based on something. Bias means that there's something that they get out of it, right? And so the suggestion again is that they're on the take from Sony, that they've taken a bribe, right? Or something, some other type of ludicrous theory. Right. And I don't see one scrap of evidence that points towards that.
No, because there's no evidence that points towards that. And that's kind of been my point. Now, so Shuma says the arguments. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're doing. So the arguments are based on what ifs. If a natural market practice such as acquisitions can be blocked based on what ifs, then does that mean the free market has failed? It's kind of funny because shoot 'em ups is like he's dancing on the razor sharp fence of reality and delusion. You're right, but I mean, again, the arguments are based on what ifs. That is what a regulatory agency does when it's evaluating antitrust and anti-competition. They're evaluating what the risks are. They're not waiting to see whether or not something happens. The whole point of their existence in ruling in this is to prevent the what ifs from culminating into reality. Those evaluations are often going to be heavily based on things that have gone on before in history. That's why I pointed to the articles that have shown that Microsoft has had a history of anti-competitive practices in the EU market. That is a Microsoft problem. I'm not the evil person for pointing that out. I didn't make that reality happen, right? Those are things that they've done, right? Now, your comment about, does that mean the free market has failed? I don't want to say that it's failed, but I do want to say that we, fortunately or unfortunately, and again, I don't necessarily agree with it all the time, we have established an institutional regime on this planet where we do not allow the free market to operate independently, as an economist might argue it should. Now, what I would hold is the reason for that, the entire reason for the existence of government, is to protect people from harm in an encroachment on their freedoms in instances where someone would take advantage of that, right? That is the only reason in my mind for government to exist. That's the only reason for these trade organizations to exist. The reason for these trade organizations to exist and the function that they're performing in this instance is when corporations, companies start to approach and potentially risk crossing a threshold to where they will act in a harmful manner, right, to consumerism and trade. and in that instance, they erect barriers. And yes, it's arguably taking action before the free market would be allowed to respond, because the risk in allowing antitrust, allowing anti-competitive practices and approaching monopoly, and I don't believe that Microsoft would ever become a monopoly, right? In this instance, I've seen some PlayStation fans kind of lean in that direction, and I'm like, you guys don't understand what the definition of a monopoly is, and don't understand that
that's one of the most abused terms: monopoly,
right.
Anti-consumer, egregious. Yeah, I see PlayStation fans say, "Oh, it's a monopoly." No, it's not a monopoly. It's not a monopoly. It's not how that works.
And in some instances, there are monopolies that are allowed and that are illegal, right? That's another big problem of people's failure of understanding.
Windows.
Yeah, you could argue that point. But yeah, we right, wrong, or indifferent, we have a penchant for intervening, right, in free market dynamics. And the reason for that is because if you allowed things to progress in the direction of a monopoly, or you allowed anti-competitive practices to come into reality, right, the problem is that in the course of waiting for the free market to bounce back and respond to that, consumerism would be harmed, trade would be harmed, and the impact on that, right, is an impact to a nation's earning capability, eventually to their gross national productivity and gross national product, gross national output, right? And those things then impact things that we are really concerned about, such as national security, right, in certain circles. And so the reason these innovations take place, and you risk the problem of once something becomes anti-competitive and starts to approach a monopoly, it becomes impossible to turn around.
Walmart,
right? So sometimes without obliterating the entire market itself.
Walmart.
And so that's why these things are happening, right?
Walmart's egregious.
Again, shoot 'em ups, not horrific, entirely incorrect concerns, but I think the extrapolation from that point to, the CMA is biased and they're trying to protect Sony and they're ignoring the fact that Sony does these two practices, I think that's where you kind of maybe go to an orbit too far.
Yeah, and I don't agree with Jeff B. Game. He says it's a danger of becoming one, though, Brad, because the size of this realm said they aren't done buying. You say Microsoft's not done buying. Again, I don't think that automatically leads to them being a monopoly, because ultimately there's still choice, consumer choice, and there's still, assuming they don't buy everyone, there's still opportunities for other companies to compete in the gaming space, or for consumers to take their business elsewhere. So I'm not there with that one. Any thoughts on his comments, on Jeff B. Game's comments, Hamp? We lose Hamp? We may have lost Hamp. Hold on. Hamp, are you there? All right. I think we may have lost Hamp, but look, one thing I did want to do, let me see, go back to the CMAs here. Where's their, all right, so let me go. Actually, let me move on to, I think we lost Hamp. We may have lost Hamp. Hamp, are you there? We may have lost him. All right, I do want to bring something up before we close out the show tonight. I did want to mention that one thing I'm actually excited about, which I thought was a pretty cool announcement, is that Microsoft is partnering with Meta, or Oculus, as I like to refer to it. Yeah, a component of 55150 says that Microsoft doesn't need to buy anymore. We need games. I agree with you 110% there. Well, no, shoot them up. So we didn't say that. We acknowledge that you didn't say that they were being buys. You said that they were rubbish. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. That was my that was my conflation of the two. So yeah, but again, your basis that it's rubbish was based on that they're ignoring that Sony does the same things, and I think we spoke to that.
Yeah, we did. We talked about the economies of scale being different. So one thing I want to mention before we wrap up, one thing I'm excited about, and look, I actually think what Microsoft's doing in terms of branching out or getting the Xbox ecosystem of other platforms, I actually like it. I think it's a cool thing. because it gives me the flexibility to play their first party content where I want. I think I'm okay with that, especially on PC, which is the platform that everyone should be gaming on. Because if you want the definitive gaming experience, do yourself a favor, trade in the malt liquor. I mean the gaming console, and buy yourself a PC. And Hamp, I don't think you would disagree with that. So one of the things that that was announced this week was that Microsoft is going to be partnering with Oculus. They're bringing xCloud to the Oculus or Meta VR headsets. And I got to say, Hamp, I'm actually excited about that, man. I'm actually going to try it out. I think it's cool that Microsoft is giving access to its content on a variety of different devices. And look, it's another option. And I'm all for the options. So I know a lot of people didn't talk about that this week, but I thought that was a really cool announcement that Microsoft made in the partnership with Meta. So, Hamp, I'm assuming you're probably not going to try xCloud on VR.
No.
That's a big no.
Yeah. And I'm and like I've expressed my feelings about VR. I think it's
the future.
Yeah, I'm happy for people to invest in that, but I think it's an interstitial technology that will go the way of the dinosaur, and will be superseded once we get the holodeck. But
the holodeck.
But I'm glad for you guys to invest in it, because that's because we'll lean on that technology to make the holodeck, and without you guys paying your quan for it, we wouldn't get to the real future of gaming that we're all trying to get to.
Yeah, so somebody actually asked me, I'll answer this question. They're like, BRAP, do you want this deal to go through? Because you sound like you're against it. I'm like, no, I don't have any skin in the game for either company. Because if Microsoft doesn't provide me with the kind of gaming content I want, I'll go elsewhere. Same for Sony. But I kind of what you mentioned, Hamp, I want to see, like, yeah, I think I want to see this deal go through, only because I want to see what would happen. The idea of competition, the idea that, Sony would have to, and you got to imagine there's probably some contingency plans in place in case this does happen where they don't have COD. I think they'd be foolish if they didn't have one. And I got to imagine there's smart people working there. There's probably some contingency there. I would hope. But I want to see what happens next. We've never seen anything like this in the industry. In the 40 years I've been gaming, I've never seen the kind of consolidation and especially this huge acquisition. And by the way, I had debates with people saying Microsoft's not competing. No, this is competition. Microsoft is in fact competing. And I just want to see what would happen. I'm interested to see how Sony would react, and if COD went exclusive, and then I'm interested to see how Microsoft can potentially manage this huge undertaking of acquisitions, because it's never been done before. So
yeah, and people say they're not competing. Again, I think it will really open people's eyes to really study industry and study the technology industry and study its history, and understand that to the 90th percentile. None of the big five companies have become the companies that they are without acquisitions. When you actually look at what they've created successfully, outside of Microsoft, those numbers are very, very, very small, right? For all the moonshots Google has taken, they've built like 3 things, right? And most of everything else that's under that umbrella has been acquisition. So the fact of the matter, people say buying isn't competing, as Jeff B. Gamey said. And again, in my mind, Jeff, that's a mythological framework. That's how you view the world, and that's fine. I think the way real business operates is that, again, you don't become a company of that size without buying. And then if you want to argue that, a $3 trillion company isn't competing, then that's fine. But I think their investors and their shareholders might think differently. But one thing I do want to loop back to is the comments on PC gaming, and because I've been saying a lot about this week in the console war and the fighting about gaming, about the Kissinger doctrine and trying to practice diplomacy. In the ideas of commensurate response, I will say Jeff B says, what did he say? Only a small percentage own GPUs more powerful than a Series X or PS5. Jeff, I will agree with you if you will simply agree to compromise that those of us who do should be given full acknowledgement that we have systems that are more powerful than the Series X or PS5. Right?
Oh, well said.
What I just don't understand, the irrationality is that because only a small percentage of us have GPUs that are more powerful, that we act and behave as if they're not, that like I should see the world through the eyes of the other percentage of the PC gaming market that has less powerful hardware. I don't that's like telling me I bought a Ferrari but putting a speed limiter on it and only allowing me to drive it at 60 miles per hour. Like I don't really understand that.
Yeah. And I thought the more recent Steam survey had the 3060. I got to go back and look at this.
My thing is that I don't care. Like I mean, and I get it and I understand. And when I assess the market, this is one of the reasons why I stand on that like notion, that fact, is when I constantly say all these notions of like, well, blah 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 console and blah 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 hardware is holding gaming back. I'm like, no, it's not. Like if they're deploying that game on PC, they have to support an amount of hardware, a span of hardware, a spectrum of hardware that far exceeds, right, the distance from the flagpole that the Xbox Series S is, right? Like to me, that's a made up thing. So I don't buy that. So I acknowledge that, right? That common components, right? This is why I say that this race that's going to wind up driving everybody out of business, right? To build the biggest games that run on the biggest hardware don't really make sense, right? But like I get it, other people don't have it, but please stop throwing shade at the people who do. Right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I don't understand that. Like, is that just spite or what? I don't get it.
Real quick, Board Country, the $2 super chat says, sell your PS5 November 8th since PC is the best. Shaking my head. You know what, Borbor? I will. I'll sell my PS5. And I'll just wait to play. I'll wait to play the definitive version of God of War then on PC.
And again, I'm going to go with the level head. I'm not going to go as far with you. I think PC is a viable gaming platform. I think people should entertain the notion of buying one if they choose to. They should. I think one thing people shouldn't do is people shouldn't say PC gaming is so expensive, right? People should actually do the math and see just how far of a rock it is. I don't know that it's as far a distance as some people think. And I also think it's a platform that you can invest in at the low end and then scale upwards over time. But I think consoles still have their place. I think they still fit. At the end of the day, what I believe in is figure out what your requirements are and buy the thing that meets those requirements. Please stop buying a thing because you're listening to other people or trying to participate in the zeitgeist or being hyped up by the hype man, right? And then justifying what you've bought by creating new requirements and trying to say that your requirements are everyone else's. I think that's the problem with the dialogue.
I agree 100%. To Jet B Gaming, he says, what game on PC now is pushing the hardware like the 3000 series or up? It's a status thing. No, I'll ask you the same question in reverse. What console can run Cyberpunk 2077 at ultra settings, full ray tracing at 60 FPS or 120 FPS? None. All right. Sorry, I had to get that jab in there. Hamp. I'm partially part of the problem, by the way, with this conversation.
I'll allow it.
Yeah.
Council does not need to approach the bench.
You like that counter though. You like that counter. All right. So one thing that I didn't mention this earlier when we talked about the CMA. Microsoft said that Microsoft also said to the CMA that Sony has chosen to block Game Pass from PlayStation and that has elected to protect its revenues from sales of newly released games rather than offer gamers a choice of accessing them via its subscription. So that was also mentioned by Microsoft. But anyhow, Hamp, I got to say, man, I told you I was going to be kind of a rant. And I think it was. So yeah.
Yeah. Now I'll make my one last comment. Like Dasmacy, however you pronounce it. Saying, oh wait a minute, sorry, not Dasmacy. Quandle, saying Sony worked their ass off to the top. Microsoft just lazy buying their way in the gaming industry. Again, I'll go back to the comment I made a few weeks ago. What do you call a championship football team whose primary starters and quarterback they obtain through free agency and trades? you call them Super Bowl champions. So, it is what it is. You can perceive it however you want to, but dollars talk, and the other half of that.
Yeah, dollars talk and poo-poo walks. Look, at the end of the day, if you look at when PlayStation first got into the business, they just didn't organically grow all these studios either. Naughty Dog was an acquisition, so let's not. Anyhow, all right, Hamp. Got to say, thank you everyone for the live chat. I really appreciate it. I got to say, I can't wait for this deal to be approved because the conspiracy theories and some of the some very bad takes.
This is my iPhone and Samsung Galaxy, and I go through this every year. Is 6 months of conspiracy theories and conjecture and speculation, and posting JPEGs of Chinese accessory manufacturers guessing at what and I'm just like, just let the phone come out so I don't have to deal with this anymore.
Exactly. But everyone, thank you in the live chat for watching us, hanging out. Hopefully this was insightful for some. Really appreciate the time as always from everyone who sat with us for the last 2 hours and listened to us rant away. But please do me a favor, hit that like button if you're new, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. And Hamp, thank you again for joining tonight, man. Really appreciate it. And let everyone know where they can find you as well.
If you guys want, you can, I guess, follow me on Twitter at @Hamp_Lee Hampton. If you want to swing by my podcast, it is Sunday nights at about 8:45 p.m. The Enough to Keep Going Weekly Games podcast on the E2KG Network. That's the number 2. Same thing in the Enough to Keep Going title. E2KG Network on YouTube. And if you want to catch the audio and download it so you can listen to it on your commute or while you're working out or whatever, it is also available on SoundCloud, Spotify, and Pocket Casts.
Absolutely. Well, and big shout out to B Money, Gaming Forte, Slow-Mo Backslap, who couldn't join us this evening. Gentlemen, missed having you on, and we'll be back. Hopefully they'll be back with us next Wednesday. We'll be back at our regularly scheduled time, 9 p.m. We'll be back next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So this was a special 6:15 start, as BRAP wants to play some video games this evening and go to bed at a reasonable hour. So on that note, we will catch you all later. Have a great rest of the week. Enjoy your time playing video games.